Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we are talking about Hurricane Orlene, which currently has maximum sustained winds of 110 miles an hour, minimum central pressure of 966 millibars, and is moving north at 5 miles an hour. Orlene is the 15th named storm of the East Pacific hurricane season, and at the moment is heading towards the western Mexican coastline with potentially a strong tropical storm, hurricane level winds at landfall. But before that happens, this storm could become a major hurricane. Let's jump right on into it, starting off here with our forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. The National Hurricane Center expects this storm to become a major hurricane sometime on Sunday and eventually devolve back into a hurricane early morning Monday, before becoming a tropical storm sometime on Tuesday after the storm makes landfall. Now, this is very important because it will limit the impacts on western Mexico if this storm continues to weaken before it actually does make landfall. But at the moment, there are hurricane warnings in effect for portions of western Mexico and hurricane watches for a much larger span of coastline. Here's the chances of tropical storm force winds and the estimated earliest arrival time of those winds. And you can see Sunday 8 p.m. is the time frame for most of the western coastline of Mexico that could be receiving the brunt of the storm, and much of that coastline has at least a 50% chance of receiving those tropical storm force winds, as we'll get into a little bit later. But first, our key messages from the National Hurricane Center. Hurricane conditions are expected in the Islas Marias Sunday night, with tropical storm conditions beginning late Sunday. A hurricane warning has been issued for a portion of the west central mainland of Mexico, where hurricane conditions are expected on Monday, with tropical storm conditions beginning early Monday. Preparations to protect life and property should be rushed to completion. A hurricane watch has been extended southward along the west central coast of Mexico, where hurricane conditions are possible late Sunday or early Monday. Heavy rainfall from Orlene is expected to lead to flash flooding, as well as the possible landslides in areas of rugged terrain of southwestern Mexico into Tuesday. Here is the hurricane on satellite imagery. And you can see it is a much smaller storm than Ian that we just saw a few days ago, but will still have those impacts. But since it is smaller, we will see those impacts felt, the worst of the impacts felt across a smaller area, but in general, impacts could be felt basically everywhere where this hurricane watch is in effect. So right in here, you could see some very serious impacts, and we'll get into those right now. So starting off with the track of the system. Most models are showing the storm making landfall in western Mexico, but there is still a possibility that the storm veers to the west and could make impacts in the southern portion of the Baja California Peninsula. Or there's also a possibility here, as GEFS has that Baja California track, there's also the possibility that the storm just stays in the Gulf of California and doesn't make landfall in either area, which the GEPS and, weirdly enough, the European model both have happening. Now, the intensity guidance for this storm is showing the storm peaking out at either a Category 3, Category 2, and if it does make landfall, most likely as a Category 1 or 2 storm, and dropping off significantly after that as it moves on shore. But if the storm doesn't make landfall, it will still gradually weaken, because as we usually do talk about with these storms in the East Pacific, this storm will eventually make its way above the 20 degrees north parallel, which is when these storms start to weaken. And here's the HWRF hurricane model. Let's go through that timing here. So, right now we have outer bands affecting the western Mexico coastline, but as the main portion of the system heads up to the north, you can see that it does weaken significantly as it's making landfall in the Islas Marias. And then, the storm does make landfall in portions of western Mexico, or near western Mexico. It actually does stall out here, it seems like. But the storm is torn to shreds from wind shear at this point. So I think that the majority of the major impacts will be felt in the Islas Marias as well as portions of the Mexican coastline, but not really at landfall. The storm will potentially weaken all the way off before that happens. And the HWRF also has our wind speeds peaking out at around 100 knots, so about 105 miles an hour. And at landfall, you can see that the winds are down to tropical depression strength here. So definitely a massive weakening of the system. And we're going to have to go here to the P variant for our total accumulated precipitation. And you can see that after the storm's all said and done, areas of the western Mexican coastline could see up to 6 inches of rainfall. Another model that I want to look at, which does show another one of the possibilities here, is the HMON, showing that at about 11 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, the storm is nearing the Islas Marias, and again, kind of stalls out and weakens before actually making any impacts on the western Mexican coastline, the low pressure itself. And in this scenario, we can look at our wind speeds here. The HMON does have the storm peaking out at about 110 knots, which is about major hurricane status, 115 miles an hour. But by the time it's making landfall, again, tropical depression force strength. So this storm could weaken off significantly, and we do not, I believe, have a total accumulated precipitation for this model itself, but I would believe it's about the same. So right now, our hurricane models themselves are kind of disagreeing with what the National Hurricane Center says, in that this storm could weaken off completely before even making landfall in western Mexico. And the National Hurricane Center is saying that this storm will be a hurricane at that point. So it's either one or the other, and this has been one of the major stories with this storm, and that's why I haven't made a video up to this point, is that we really haven't had a lot of consistency in our models. We haven't had a lot of consistency in the NHC forecasts, and we're still not seeing any consistency between the two of them. So we really have to start to play things by ear over the next 48 hours here to see what the actual impacts of the storm are going to be in western Mexico. But, as I always say, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And in this scenario, preparing for the worst would be preparing for a major hurricane. Now, I know that neither of these models show this storm becoming a major hurricane or being a major hurricane at landfall, but this storm could gain major hurricane strength, and since there is inconsistency of how fast this storm will weaken above that 20 degrees north parallel, this storm may not even weaken at all. So, if I was living in on the western coastline of Mexico, I would prepare for a major hurricane landfall. And if that doesn't happen, great. So, again, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And for more information on either this storm or any other East Pacific or Atlantic hurricanes, stay tuned here. I will be continuing my coverage of the Atlantic and East Pacific hurricane seasons all season long, so stay tuned here by subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss any more tropical weather updates. But that's all I have for this storm and for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.